Hi, so this is an episode of the 4.0 Impact Series. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Goode from a climate tech business called Climavision over in the States. Chris is the founder and CEO. So yeah, look, Chris, let's just jump into it. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a bit of an overview as to climate tech and the story, Climavision and the story so far.
Sure. Great to be with you, Leighton, and have a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. I've spent almost 30 years in the climate tech and weather industry. And throughout that 30 years, much of it has been spent with different companies along the way trying to generate better forecasts for public safety, for different economic sensitivities with different businesses. And the struggle during that 30 years has always been, how do you produce a more accurate forecast? And it's difficult. And in part, it's difficult because what drives an accurate forecast in large part can be attributed to the global observation network, observations that are made across the globe, primarily by different governments, where they're making observations both on the ground, in the sky through the use of radiosondes, etc., radars. And there are significant gaps, though, in those observations when you think about things on a global scale. And the most impactful way and substantive way that you can provide a more accurate forecast is by introducing new observations to that global observation network. And that's exactly what we're doing at Climavision.
Okay. So look, we've talked at detail. So I feel like I've got a really good understanding of exactly, what you guys are building there. But look, many of the people we interview for this particular podcast, it's around, they're kind of saving the planet. They're creating some kind of a solution to climate change. Now, obviously, you're a climate tech business. It's not strictly that, but it's more almost like catastrophe aversion. So could you
mitigation?
Could you give if you could just give a bit of insight into the technology, because it's quite inspiring stuff. I mean, I think it's really relevant to note at this point that it's you're going big. You're just over 12 months into a $100 million Series A investment round. So, it's big business.
It is. And I mean, we've got a big agenda. And as it pertains to the overall climate, as you mentioned, I mean, we can't stop climate change from happening. But what we can do is provide better information and lead time so that the public and businesses can prepare and at least mitigate the impacts of the frequency and volatility that we have in today's climate. That's our goal. And when I talk about the types of businesses that we impact, you think about transportation, whether it's in the air or on the ground, all impacted by weather. We've all been stranded at the airport at one time or another, and usually we're stranded because of the impacts of weather. You think about new industries that are emerging, like the drone industry. A number of companies now are looking at using drones to deliver parcels, using drones for different surveillance of activities, whether it be security or monitoring crops and things of that nature. So there's a lot of businesses that are affected dramatically by a changing climate. And what we're doing specifically at Climavision is we're rolling out technology to fill in these gaps. So to start with, here in the US, we're rolling out a supplemental radar network that will fill in the gaps between the existing government radars that are placed around the US. The government supplies roughly about 160 radars that cover the continental US and parts of Alaska. And there are gaps between these radars, and we're filling them with our radar tech. Beyond the US, we're starting to selectively look at regions globally where there are even more dramatic gaps in radar networks for various countries. And we'll be placing our radars in those areas as well. The difference, though, in terms of our business model versus a traditional business model as it relates to radars and radar information is that we own the radars. We monetize the investment in the radar networks that we're standing up by selling off subscriptions to the data that we produce.
Okay.
The other area that we're working in is filling in gaps in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And we do that with space observations through low Earth orbiting satellites that are circling the globe over the oceans where we have the most problematic areas of gaps, as you can imagine, and filling in those areas with a really critical piece of information that's called radio occultations, or GPSRO. Then we take all of these new observations, plus what's already been out there for decades that have been collected by various governments that are a part of the WMO. We mix all of those things together, and then we can produce a model that provides far more insights and granularity as to the developing types of weather that we're all experiencing.
Okay, so that's a really detailed overview. So when you say like gaps in the infrastructure, you mean almost like blind spots, so parts of the ocean that are not yet covered by radar, where, for instance, a storm could be, it could be the beginning of a storm, and up until now, there's no way of detecting that until it becomes, really big and intense.
Yeah, there are ways to detect it, but they're not the types of ways that we can readily assimilate into forecast models. So radar observations, radio occultation that I talked about, all of those data sets can now be assimilated into our proprietary weather model that we run at Climavision, and that allows us to produce better insights. There are also customers that we work with that just want the output of the radars themselves, and they can use that within their operations to understand the impacts of developing weather over a short term.
Understood. So I mean, when you explain it like that, the commercial application for having that information, at your fingertips is, I mean, it's very self-evident. But from I suppose from a climate perspective, I'm guessing that your technology and your infrastructure can also help measure the effects of climate change and the damage and I suppose the changes in weather patterns over X period.
Absolutely. So over time, as we build up an archive of the observations that we're making, those can be used to inform us of trends in the changing climate. So there's no question there. Yeah. We are focused at the moment on about a 15-day forecast range so that we can provide better insights that are happening as it relates to, let's just give you a specific example, for instance. A big buzzword right now is to talk about the energy transition. Mm-hmm. It's a huge effort, not only here in the US, but globally, and also there in the UK. We're all efforting to transition away from fossil fuels, which of course have a negative impact on the climate from a number of perspectives. Mm-hmm. And we're transitioning to renewable sources of energy, which are all derived from weather, whether it's wind, solar, or hydro. So as part of that transition, we consider ourselves an enabling technology, because to have a successful transition to these renewable forms of energy, you have to have a much more granular understanding of their availability. Because, for instance, if you look back, just going back 8-9 months in the UK, the wind for a substantial period of time literally stopped blowing. So wind farms are sitting there not able to generate the necessary energy to fill the demand. And what happened? In some instances, they had to revert back to coal-fired plants, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid, right?
Yeah.
So it comes down to how can we balance the grid and ensure that we have enough of the renewable forms of energy such that we don't face issues like that. We can plan for storage and things like that. So these are becoming more and more critical. And I would say that the energy market is the primary market that we've started to get traction in with a number of our different forms of insights and technology.
Understood. But I suppose the wider application could be, shipping, commerce,
Absolutely.
yeah, like transportation, like you said, whether it's air freight, land, sea. I mean, the application is kind of almost infinite.
Yeah, the logistics space is very important, and they need much better information because of the volatility. The other market that we work in is in risk, financial services, and in insurance. With insurance, a lot of the policies written around insurance, of course, rely on historical records or norms.
Mhm.
And when you have a changing climate like we have right now, that history can't be relied upon as much as it has been, because it's not representative of what's happening now and what's going to happen in the foreseeable future, because things are changing so much more rapidly. So there's a heavier reliance on predictive technologies like we have at Climavision to, again, kind of fill in those gaps and accommodate for the lesser reliance on history.
Understood. So what, I suppose in closing, we talked about, your round, 100 million is a big number. It's a very big number, but equally, I imagine that building satellites and whatnot, is an expensive endeavor. But what is the, if you could just give us a bit of an insight into, I suppose, the journey to Series A, and then what Series A, kind of looks like, what Climavision now looks like post Series A for maybe the next 12 months.
Sure. So you're right, Leighton. Our business is more than software and people. There's real hardware, there's real tech that we're building from the ground up. So from a radar standpoint, that's a capital intensive type of business. So in part, that's the reason for the large Series A. And our backers at TPG and the Rise Fund kind of recognized what we were doing, and we have a big agenda. Because again, while we're doing a lot of this to start here in the US, we're running a global model right now that covers the entire globe. So it's a big agenda, and it required a lot of resources to get us going and off the ground. But now that we've been up and running for now almost 15 months, we're starting to generate revenues, of course, that are corresponding with those efforts. And we've got big plans. We expect this to be a large business globally, servicing a number of the industries that we've already talked about. Agriculture is one that we haven't really touched on, but that's a big market, right?
Yeah.
With climate change, it becomes a more difficult scenario in terms of where are crops grown, and does that change over time? So a lot of the insights that we're developing can help both in the short and long-term planning of the globe's food supply.
Okay. Yeah, look, I mean, agriculture wasn't even one that we mentioned, but I mean, that almost feels like the most obvious one. Nowhere is it going to be, more felt, I imagine, than agriculture, in terms of when to plant, when not to plant, seasonal variances. And again, you hit the nail on the head. It's not something that you can rely purely on historic trends. They can only go so far, but there's always going to be, especially in the volatile environment we live in now, there's always going to be, massive spikes and changes. So, you guys are giving much more real time, and also predictive analytics around that.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, look, so lastly, so the next, what's a key milestone for the next 12 months then? What does 2023 look like for Climavision?
Well, 2023 is the year of the build out of a substantial part of the radar network here in the US. Across our phase 1 region, we'll have almost 50 radars up and running, filling in gaps between the existing radars. Many of these areas in underserved communities, where the people that are living in those areas are more vulnerable to severe types of weather. Phase 1 for us here in the US is across the southeast and south central part of the country, where virtually around the 12-month calendar year, you can get varying types of impactful weather that are quite dangerous, from tornadoes to hailstorms, severe thunderstorms, flooding, etc. So having the radar network to augment the existing NextRad network up and running is going to start to deliver some real value over 2023, and we're really excited about that.
No, very exciting. Look, personally, I'm interested to see exactly where it goes. You've got, you've got very, very ambitious plans. I mean, like the success of the business so far since it was initially incorporated to where we are now has been nothing short of pretty monumental. So big boots to fill. And it'll be really interesting to see what the next 12 months looks like for you guys.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the conversation today, Leighton, and look forward to kind of staying in touch with you and updating you on our progress.
Yeah, no, and I look forward to watching you guys grow. So look, Chris, thanks very much for jumping on this. It was really insightful and also quite inspirational because, not to keep, it's not all about the money, but not to keep harping back, but it's a big number. It's a big number. And there's a lot of, aspirational people out there that would be looking to achieve similar things within their space. So look, thank you very much for this. It was really good to chat.
Thanks very much, Leighton.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.